What the Diabetes Associations only told us in 2010, Sushruta told us at that time, in his time, when he said, if you have Madhumeha, then reduce your grain intake. So how do you reduce grain intake? He said, pick up the grains that have dropped naturally from the plants and eat only that. So it's not that you're going and dropping and you have kilos and kilos of grain coming in, rice or wheat or something that has dropped off naturally. You can pick it off the ground and that much you can eat, right? He prescribes soups of wild animals, jungala, creatures. Also, we had begun eating grain because the British paid salaries in grain. And we were teaching the children, eat more, eat everything on your plate. Don't throw anything away. Eat as often as you can because we don't know when the next meal is coming, maybe not for a couple of days. So when you have food security, you eat less. When there is no food security, you tend to eat more and as often as you can.
Welcome to the Recovery and Transformation Podcast, the show that links personal health with societal well-being. I'm your host, Sameer Dossani. I'm an activist, a PhD student, and a health coach based out of Johannesburg, South Africa. This show explores the root causes of disease and talks about how people are recovering and transforming every day. Hi, and welcome to another episode. My guest today is Dr. Manoshi Bhattacharya. Dr. Bhattacharya is a food historian and a physician based in Gurgaon, India. Her books include Royal Rajputs and No Food Off Limits, which we go into a bit in this discussion. This is a really great conversation for a number of reasons, but for me what stands out is that India has led the way both in understanding diabetes and in terms of developing diabetes at a mass scale. One reason that this is the case is that in India we have a concept of what Dr. Bhattacharya calls the famine cuisine. And nearly all of our Indian food traditions have a point of origin in this so-called famine cuisine. Now, if you enjoy content like this, please do remember to like, subscribe, and click the bell to get updates. If you're looking to transform your health, feel free to get in touch using the link in the description. With that, please enjoy my conversation with Manoshi Bhattacharya. Dr. Manoshi Bhattacharya, it's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me, Sameer.
So please tell us a little bit about yourself and your background, both in terms of your own history and in the medical field.
So I'm a doctor. I was in the Navy. And after I finished my service, I was, that's when I got interested in history. And one of my friends from the hydrographic department called me up and he said they're looking for somebody to write their history. And you were always so fond of history. So why don't you apply for it? So that's how my first book came about. So I started from being a medical doctor, seeing patients. I moved on to writing. My first book was Charting the Deep, which was a history of the hydrographic branch of the Navy. And that got me interested in writing. My next book was, again, a book now on land surveyors, so Colonel James Todd. And I read his Annals and Antiquities of Rajasthan. I said, this needs to be written, in modern English, cleaned up a bit. So I wrote up the Royal Rajputs, Strange Tales, Stranger Truths, which is a fun book aimed at tourists. So a tourist goes to a place and then he says, oh, the guide told me such lovely stories. I can't remember them. I wish there was a book in which these stories were there. And so Royal Rajputs has them all. And it also tells you what the actual truth was. What is the bardic tale and what is the actual truth? And then I wrote about the Chittagong Armory raid, which was, I landed up with some first-hand accounts, some diaries and letters, personal letters of the people who took part in the raid. So I used that, and I used the British home letters that they wrote to their wives, the diaries they kept, and to show both sides, showcase both sides of the story. So that book came about, and then I did something for myself, which was write down all the favorite childhood stories. that I'd grown up with. And when this was over, then I got back into writing about medicine and history. So I started studying diabetes and what was causing diabetes. And I realized that this was now 2011, and the diabetic associations were very clear by now that it is carbohydrate that raises blood sugar, which is fine. But how much do we eat? How do I calculate it? Right? So we eat food, we are not eating grams of carbohydrates and grams of protein and grams of fat. So at this time, the USDA, the Food Data Central, they brought out the entire food database, and it was open for everybody to use. The point was, it said 100 grams of raw rice is 80 grams of carbohydrate, it has whatever, 2-3 grams of fiber, 2-3 grams of protein, a little 1%, 1 gram of fat. But really, I didn't know how much rice I ate. Do you know how much rice you eat in one sitting? When you have lunch, how much rice do you take? You can approximately tell me the volume. But do you know how many grams of raw rice?
No idea.
No. So you actually have to do this. You actually have to cook and measure and cook and measure. And once you got it, I realized that I was eating about 30 grams of raw rice. I could convert it into 90 grams of cooked rice, or I could convert it into 130 grams of cooked rice, depending on how soft I cooked my rice. So I'm not interested in the water. Water has no carbohydrate, fat, or protein. I'm only interested in the raw weight of rice. So the first thing to do was to learn to cook. So I learned to cook and to serve one person's food. It's cooking for one. And so this took me a while. I did Bengali food. I learned it from my mother. I did, we live in North India. We eat a lot of North Indian food, continental food. I did that. And then I said, if I can do this, then I can also do food from other states. So it's very simple, just getting people from other states to teach me to cook and teach me to serve. What are they serving portions? What is the consistency that they serve? And when I analyzed it, I put it on my Excel sheet and used the USDA database. I measured everything from milligrams of haldi to milligrams of dhania powder, zira powder. Everything was measured. And I realized we were all eating far more carbohydrate, and we had a very low protein, low fat diet. Quite a low fat diet. And on the average, we are consuming about 50 grams of fat, that is oils, fats, invisible fats that are in the foods. If you add it all up, in a day, we're consuming about 50 grams. Right?
Sorry, just if I can interrupt you for 1 second. So this is, just to clarify the methodology, this is a survey of your friends, mostly in North India, some of whom would have been vegetarian, but not all of whom. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
It's not a survey. It is, I'm cooking with them.
You're cooking with them.
I am measuring, and then I'm analyzing.
Okay, fantastic.
So it's not recall. I am in real time cooking with them in their kitchens, eating with them on their dining tables.
100%. And you're measuring everything as you go along.
Measuring everything.
Fantastic.
The trouble with most papers on nutrition and most papers that deal with food is they work on a recall basis. What did you eat last week? Really, I can't remember what I ate yesterday. I doubt very much anybody can recall what they ate last week. So these...
And some of those food frequency questionnaires, they're not just asking last week, they're asking what you ate 6 months ago, right? And they give you 100 different boxes to tick. So it's quite confusing.
So the result of which was this book that I had written, which was called No Food Off Limits. And in it, basically what I've done is I've worked with USDA figures. So USDA said, give 130 grams of glucogenic carbohydrate. That's the term I've coined. Glucogenic carbohydrate is the portion of the carbohydrate which actually raises blood sugar.
So you basically subtract the fiber from the carbohydrate total.
Okay. Yeah. So this was my first book. I didn't want to get into any argument with anybody. I was trying to explain to people that you can work out your macronutrients and micronutrients from any menu in the country. So I have 7 menus in this book. One is Kashmir, one is Bengal, one is Punjab, one is a vegetarian, completely vegetarian, one is from South India, and one is a Raj kind of day, when you eat your mashed potatoes and fried fish and chips and things like that. So it is 7 menus, and you are taught how to weigh and measure, and you're taught the RDAs of every macronutrient, and most macronutrients don't have RDAs. Fat has no RDA. You're taught about salt, how to eat, how much salt you're going to eat, and where the mistakes happen and why salt becomes, why some people eat more salt than other people do. So at the end of this work, the question that arose was, why do Indians eat a diabetogenic diet? We're eating a hugely carbohydrate-based diet. And it's not that we're eating white flour, white potatoes and white sugar the way the West portrays it. We're not doing that. We're not a soda drinking nation. The masses don't have access to all this. They are getting the carbohydrate from dal, sabzi, roti. They're getting it from there. So basically, one has to understand where carbohydrates come from. So the carbohydrates primarily come from plants. And when I'm saying plants, I'm talking about grains and vegetables and fruits and everything. Everything that is a plant produce will have carbohydrates in it. The only carbohydrate that comes from an animal produce, the only animal produce that has carbohydrate is milk.
100%. And we talk about
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We talk about lactose as milk sugar and made up of galactose and glucose and so on. What I wanted to ask, so this bit about India being a diabetogenic country is a fairly new narrative. New meaning, I guess, 10, 20 years old, maybe longer than that. You'll
No, it is not. It is not.
No. Okay. Tell me. So it's I mean, even when I was growing up, I mean, not that I was super interested in these issues in the 1980s, but I mean, we thought of India as a place of sort of starving people. Like we didn't think of it as a place of diabetes. So when did that narrative change?
Okay, so we are the first country to have identified diabetes. Madhumeha was identified by Sushruta, and the dates can be argued upon, but from 6th century BCE to 6th century AD, he could have been anywhere in that time, but well before anybody else in the world, he had called it Madhumeha, sweet urine, honey urine. He knew that. He knew this existed. And what the Diabetes Associations only told us in 2010, Sushruta told us at that time, in his time, when he said, if you have Madhumeha, then reduce your grain intake. So how do you reduce grain intake? He said, pick up the grains that have dropped naturally from the plants and eat only that. So it's not that you're going and dropping and you have kilos and kilos of grain coming in, rice or wheat or something that has dropped off naturally. You can pick it off the ground and that much you can eat, right? He prescribes soups of wild animals, jungala, creatures. So game meat soups, and he says walking is one of his biggest treatments. So diet and exercise, that is what he gave us. The world did not recognize this until 2010.
Yeah, this is pretty impressive. And again, the person you're talking about lived in 6th century, you say?
6th century BCE, probably.
6th century BCE. So we're talking more than 2,000 years ago. Amazing stuff. Amazing stuff.
We have that knowledge.
Yeah. So you've researched the food history of India in a lot of detail, but unfortunately, the food history of India tends to be viewed through this lens of like vegetarianism. So what can you tell us about the history of vegetarianism in India?
So for that, let me tell you about the food history of India. When you look at the history of Indian people, it goes back to 70,000 BCE. Okay, that's when man came from Africa and came into India. And what were they eating? That was the Mesolithic period. They were primarily eating game meat, and they were collecting wild vegetables, which were yams and things. And when you eat like that, basically you have a very small appetite because you're eating mainly protein and fat and very little carbohydrate from these wild yams and things, which are, you can only collect so much. How do we know that this was the diet? Because some of these people got marooned on islands for 70,000 years. And we know they were marooned and they did not mix with anybody else because two, maternal lineage genes, they have developed in them among these Andamanese people. And they don't exist in Southeast Asia, don't exist anywhere else. So these people have been isolated for 70,000 years. When the British anthropologists first studied them, they recorded their diet, their habits in detail, and this is what they were eating. And they tried to introduce them to domesticated meats and to domesticated plants, and they shun it even today. The ones who accepted it all have metabolic disease.
Sorry, can you repeat that? The ones who accepted it, sorry, I missed the end there.
Have metabolic disease.
Oh, okay.
They're all obese with diabetes. And the ones who have not accepted it are lean, slim people without these diseases. So they still exist, and we still can see what they're eating. And they still shun the produce of domestication, be it plants or animals. Okay, so now Mesolithic period Indians from 70,000 BCE to 8,000 BCE, they would have eaten like this. 8,000 BCE, agriculture comes in, but it's a very rudimentary agriculture. There have been vegetarians. I've thought a lot about this. It is possible that there were pure vegetarians during this period. But these were people who were probably just ascetics. They did no work. All they did was sit and pray and meditate or whatever. And it was the working people who would look after them by bringing them vegetables to eat. And they ate only that much that gave them the energy to meditate. Because to need energy to work, you need a lot of plants. A small amount of meats and fats, animal food, will give you a lot of energy. To get the same amount of energy from plants, you need to eat a lot of plants. So to be able to be a vegetarian and be a working person, you need an abundance of plant produce. And that won't come without agriculture. So now,
just to be clear, we're talking now about the period after the advent of Buddhism and Jainism, right? Or are we still talking before?
No, not of Buddhism.
Okay.
We are from these ascetics who lived maybe in the Mesolithic period, Neolithic period, maybe even in Harappa, 5,000 to 3,000, 1,900 BCE. These pure vegetarians, it would have been very few people. I mean, somebody has to be maintaining you all the time. These people could have been the ancestors of our Vanaprastha or Sannyas ashram or Jain monks. Yeah. They could have evolved from these people.
So generally, I know this history from a history of religion perspective a little bit more. And generally when we talk about the concept of vegetarianism sort of entering what is today India, we usually talk about two figures, Mahavir Jain and Gautam Buddha, as Gautam Buddha, who wasn't really a vegetarian himself, but that ideology and kind of protest against the sacrificial religion of the Vedas was seen as one possible starting point, along with Jainism.
I don't really know whether he protested against it. He was talking about enlightenment, so be aware of what you're doing.
Yeah.
And when the Buddhism spread to the rest of the world, all those Buddhists are non-vegetarians, right?
No, even in the Indian context.
His last meal was a non-vegetarian meal.
100%.
In 6th century AD, when Huan Sang and Ai Tsing, the Chinese Buddhist scholars, came to India, they were meat-eating Buddhists. And they were completely shocked that the Indian Buddhists had turned vegetarian. And the Indian Buddhists had probably turned vegetarian because of the influence of Jainism. That is what I think. And it's the monks who turned vegetarian.
No, 100%.
People who had to labor and maintain them had to be the elite class who could afford a lot of plant produce.
Yeah.
And didn't have to work much.
So I guess what I'm asking is so I think we more or less agree on the history of sort of post Jainism and Buddhism. But if I understand you correctly, you're saying that there were or there may have been, vegetarian asceticism may have existed prior to those religions as well. Have I understood that correctly?
It is very possible.
Okay.
Very possible.
Okay.
And that the vegetarian monks and sadhus were descended from those people.
Could be.
And even in our Hindu system, we have the four ashrams, right? Brahmacharya, Grihast, Vanaprastha, and Sannyas. Vanaprastha and Sannyas.
So sorry, we should just explain this a little bit for those who may not understand. These are the life stages of a Hindu, yeah? Supposed, yes.
So Brahmacharya ashram are students, children.
Yeah.
Grihast are the ones who are married, are in the reproductive phase of life, and are actively working. Right? They're laboring, they're tilling the land, or the soldiers. The Vanaprastha are the retirees who've gone back to the forest. And the sannyas are the ones who've given up everything, all material goods, right? So children are pure vegetarians. Vanaprastha, but children are allowed produce of agriculture. Vanaprastha and sannyas are not permitted produce of agriculture. They are pure vegetarians, who do not eat produce of agriculture, which means they are linked to the old ascetics that I'm talking about in the Mesolithic times, when produce of agriculture was not permitted, was not eaten. Right? And the Grihastha ashram is interesting because this is the ashram that is working, reproducing, and maintaining the other ashrams. They are looking after everybody else. They can eat game meats on the day of the feasts when they give prasad to the gods. The prasad is game meat, alcohol, sugar. These three things are prasad. They're offered to the gods on feast days, and then it is shared amongst everybody, regardless of whatever caste, creed, whatever kind of division you can think of. Anybody who will accept that prasad is free to eat it. Right? So, but they get to eat it only on feast days. On the other days, they eat produce of agriculture, which is one meal a day, and they have to fast several days in a month. The Mesolithic people also fasted because when you're eating game meat, your appetite is not high. You have so much energy that you can go for several days without eating. Also, it's not feasible to make a kill every day. So automatically, there are days that you fast. Fasting means no food at all, maybe not even water sometimes. So the concept of fasting has changed now when people actually overeat on days of fasts.
Yeah, you make a point that, in order for the masses to have adopted vegetarianism, they would have had to have been sort of a lot of plant foods that didn't exist, right? So the point is that, this vegetarianism as a sort of mass construct would have come in later. And in a recent article, you connect this with the history of colonialism. So you and some others have argued that colonial policy may have helped create famines in India. In fact, we know that it did help create famines in India, including, I believe it's the 1906 famine that Winston Churchill was sort of presiding over. So how do these three stories, colonial policy, vegetarianism, and famines, how are these interlinked?
So what happened was, during the Raj, the common areas, that is the forests, the rivers, seas, common wastelands, all this got taken over, became property of the British Indian government of British India. So to collect firewood, you needed a license. To hunt and eat, you needed a license. To catch a fish and eat, you needed a license, right? So suddenly, people couldn't eat anymore. Something that was as free as the air you had to pay for it. Things had suddenly changed. So people started streaming out of the forests and coming into the little towns and villages where only the Grihasthashram lived, and said, we need your money. We need to buy food. So we give us any work, we will do it. And this large, 80% of the country was forest. That entire area was emptied out into the towns and cities. Now, produce of agriculture was taxed at a very high rate, and meats were taxed at a very high rate. So how did the people survive? They survived on, wild stuff on which there were no taxes, saag growing around drains and ponds and greens and things that were being thrown away. They started eating that to survive. But you could no longer offer meat to the gods and then eat it as prasad. So it was so expensive. So there is this book after the famine of 1900, the Great Famine of 1900. There is this book written by E. Sherman Oakley. It's called The Holy Himalayas. And he documents this. And he says, Hindus eat once a day. And now they're giving up eating meat. As far as high in the Himalayas, up in the Himalayas, they're saying we will not eat meat anymore. And the simple reason was they could not offer it as prasad. They would not eat it unless it was prasad, unless it was sanctified meat and consecrated meat. And since they couldn't offer it to the gods, they would not eat it.
Sorry, so just explain to me again. So what was it about? Was it colonial policy that was preventing them from offering meat as prasad, or?
Taxation, yes. So it was a famine amongst plenty. There was plenty of food, but the taxes were so high that people couldn't eat. It wasn't that there was a shortage of food.
So because of a perceived or the expense of meat, it was no longer being offered as prasad. Okay.
Yeah. And in 200 years you go through 200 years of this, living memory fails you. It goes. What is living memory? It is the stories I have heard from my grandparents, and they will have the memories of their grandparents. How far does it take me and you? It takes us back to 1850. What is 1850? We are in the middle of the British Raj, and the policies have come into effect. 1865, they will take over, the Settlement Act will take over all the forests and seas and rivers. And you have letters from, say, like the director of fisheries, who's writing, who says, there are good boats and they're all tied up, unused, and the people are starving. This is very wrong. The policy is very wrong. People are starving in the middle of plenty.
So what does the famine do to sort of the diet? You talk about something called famine cuisine. What does that mean exactly?
So when you remember you said, how far back did we know that we were on a diabetic diet? So what happened with the famine cuisine was we were eating wild plants. And also we had begun eating grain because the British paid salaries in grain. And we were teaching the children, eat more, eat everything on your plate. Don't throw anything away. Eat as often as you can because we don't know when the next meal is coming, maybe not for a couple of days. So when you have food security, you eat less. When there is no food security, you tend to eat more and as often as you can. What happened also was the mothers started cooking those wild plants and the wild foods. They started making it more delicious by adding chilies and salt and sour, tamarind and a little sugar, make it more delicious. And we still have the saying, we will cook this dal for you and you won't even miss meat. You will never know that you're not eating meat. So the idea was to make up for meat. So we intensified the flavors. Now in 1913, there was this American doctor called Frederick Madsen Allen, who wrote this book called Studies on Glycosuria and Diabetes. And he called the diet that Indians were eating the Hindu diet. And he said, this is going to cause diabetes. This is a diabetogenic diet. In 1907, Dr. C.L. Bose, he published a paper in the BMJ, and he said, the Bengal bubble, because the middle class got the jobs, they were running money, but they were eating the way the famine cuisine had been laid out. So they were eating more and more foods, but in the famine style. And they said, you increase his pay and his girth increases. On the other hand, the widows who follow a very stringent diet, they eat just one meal a day, fast several times a month, they have long and healthy lives. So it was already by the early 1900s, the world was recognizing that India was on a diabetogenic diet. But also at some level, it sounded so wonderful. Indians don't eat animals, they don't kill, they only eat plants, and they're such a spiritual country. And see, they've survived for so long. And it became a brand image for us. And somehow we are so protective of this brand image that we want to be telling the world, look at us, we vegetarians, we don't kill animals, we don't eat animals.
Yeah.
And it's a selling point.
Yeah, marketing strategy. I like
one that we can do without.
History and culture as marketing strategy. Very, very fascinating. I wanted to ask you, I know you've seen an interview I did recently with Dr. Veena Shatrugna, and she argues that post-colonial nutrition policy, so now we're fast forwarding to the 1950s and 60s, she says that was more about proving that India could feed itself through a reliance on grains and pulses than on providing universal access to high-quality nutrition. Would you agree with that statement? And
Absolutely.
If there's at least some truth to that, what are the implications when we look at the state of nutrition today?
So it was such a mind-blowing interview because, she suddenly shone light on so many of my thoughts. And what had happened was the famine, the colonial way of eating, the famine cuisine was continued. The only difference was we now had the Green Revolution and the White Revolution, and food became very cheap. Plants became very cheap. They were also new hybrids, so they were low on fiber, very, very high on glucogenic carbohydrates. And they were very soft and palatable. And so people just started eating more. And what happened was typically when you have high fiber foods, when you cook it, it doesn't reduce very much. It's still quite bulky. But when you have low fiber foods, they absolutely mush up into this very tiny amount. And then the kids will say, it's not filling. So the mothers will tend to cook where if they cooked 1 kilo of vegetables before, now they will be cooking 3 or 4 kilos of vegetables to start with. Only then will they get enough to fill the family's bellies. So I've been working with, not just people from my background, but from the poorer classes as well. And I keep asking them, why don't you eat vegetables other than potatoes? You're really eating dal, roti, chawal, and potato. Why? And they said, madam, because if you take bengan, you take loki, you take bhindi, it shrinks. And it becomes so little. It's expensive and it shrinks. Whereas if you cook a potato, it still remains like the size of a potato. It's filling. Dal actually expands on cooking. Roti and rice absorb water, and so they fill you. So and these are kept at a lower price by the government. Rice is cheap, wheat is cheap, and it's easier for the poor people to just live off these. Which means that the diabetogenic diet continues. In fact, it's worsened. So while during the colonial period, while people were eating wild plants, though they were eating primarily vegetarian food, they hadn't tipped over into diabetes and obesity and heart disease. But the moment the Green Revolution and the White Revolution happened, people continuing with the same policy, same famine cuisine, they tipped onto the other side. So the Lancet came up with the pure studies, and they said, all of India is either diabetes or pre-diabetes, right? And it's interesting, Dr. Veena talks about M.S. Swaminathan, Dr. Swaminathan. And it is his daughter, Soumya Swaminathan, Dr. Swaminathan, who in 1921 or so 2021, she finally said there is, National Institution of Nutrition is prescribing far too much of carbohydrate. We have to reduce it. And the next year, it was reduced and brought down to 130 grams per head, like the USD. Before that, National Institute of Nutrition was prescribing more carbohydrate for diabetes than the Americans without diabetes were eating. there is this NHANES study which started in 1960s and went on, covered over 5,000 people in the US. And they studied the amount of carbohydrates that people were eating, non-diabetic people were eating. And here, our diabetics were being prescribed a higher amount of carbohydrate. So this has been corrected only maybe 2 years ago. It's been brought down to 130 grams.
Yeah, you say it's been corrected, but I have to I think here we have to make some distinctions. So I think there is a sort of middle class India for whom vegetarian food may be getting a pizza these days, or going to some kind
of I'm talking about the diet chart that they're prescribing.
The diet chart they're prescribing. Absolutely. I understand. So the point that you're making, so just to sum up that point, NHANES is a longitudinal study of several thousand people. So they looked at these people over years, and of course these are eating some of the most calorie-rich and carbohydrate-rich diets on the planet. And your point is that the official nutrition guidelines for all of India was surpassing that, which is obviously unrealistic because you're asking
for diabetics.
For diabetics, sorry, for diabetics.
Guidelines for diabetics was more than what the regular American was eating.
Yeah, and if you see some of the so-called vegan experts, they still maintain that you can reverse diabetes by increasing the amount of carbohydrate and sugar. And I've never quite understood that argument. I don't think there's anything in it. Anyway, so the point is that you can't, one way to understand diabetes is as a carbohydrate intolerance or a glucogenic carbohydrate intolerance, to use your terminology. Increasing that amount beyond what a normal American would be eating is insanity. It's complete insanity, right? So we agree on that. I'm wondering if we can just go to a slightly deeper level. So in one of the interviews that I read, you made the somewhat provocative statement that vegetarians don't eat vegetables, right? And I think there we have to distinguish between two kinds, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a veg non-veg difference, because when I lived in India, almost everyone is eating mostly vegetarian, at least most days, or at least it's hard to get meat whenever you want it, even if you're a meat eater. So we don't have to pick on vegetarians, but the diet is structured such that if you are a middle class person, you may be eating at home sometimes, but you'll also be, even eating at home, you'll be eating sort of a lot of fried foods, a lot of what we call namkeen in the north, which is
what is the namkeen? It is cereals, it is grasses,
100%,
produce of grasses. Okay,
100%.
When I say vegetables, I'm talking about lauki, bhindi, bengan, tinde, okay, 100%. Carrots.
Yeah.
No,
it's completely understood. It's completely understood. And I'll give you my own analysis, and then you can critique my analysis. So what I'm saying is that the middle to upper middle class people are eating those namkeens. They're also eating more burgers and pizzas and all kinds of not even traditional quote unquote street foods, but sort of junk foods that are being imported from the West and sometimes merged. That's one class of people. And then you have people who can barely afford anything other than, as you're saying, people who have to worry about filling their stomachs. And as a result of filling their stomachs, they're eating things that have a high water content, like your rice or your breads and so on. Or they're trying to find a vegetable that is both cheap and filling, like a potato or something like that. So I think there's two classes of people, and neither of them are getting enough vegetables. Is that correct? And so then the question becomes, what do we do about it? What's the step forward here for both of those classes of people?
So basically, they have to be retaught for everybody. Everybody has to be retaught. Yeah. The produce of grasses. Now, grasses are, rice is a grass, wheat is a grass, jowar, bajra, ragi, sugarcane. These are all grasses. These are called, and their produce are called cereals or sugar. Now, whether it's sugar or it's gourd or it's, it is all the same. And these are really, really, really bad for you. Because they're very high on glucogenic carbohydrates. And unfortunately, these have become our staples. So what is my staple? It is rice or it is wheat. How can I eat my vegetable unless I have a piece of roti left or a little bit of rice left? Okay, so people have to be taught that before the Raj, we were not eating like this. When there was food security, we were not eating like this. I have two very interesting stories for you here, okay, out of history. So 4th June 1838, on that day, the Honorable William Osborne, he was military secretary to Maharaja Ranjit Singh. And they went out riding. He has written about the court of Ranjit Singh and has written everything that they were eating, right? So they were riding since dawn. And at around 12 o'clock, the Maharaja asks him, have you broken your fast yet? And he says, no. So he says, come, let's break our fast. So they're going to have breakfast, which is breaking the night-long fast. Okay, and they're breaking it at 12 o'clock. And what is eaten, what is served is on this picnic meal. I was hoping, okay, I'm going to read Aloo Paratha Lassi. This is the Maharaja of the Sikhs. Like, I was very excited, first documentation. And what was served was 6 sal leaf donas, okay, the size of teacups. Donas in which you serve food,
okay,
made of leaves.
Containers,
okay. Yeah. Sal leaves, it's little cups, about the size of an English teacup. 1 had rice, 2 had curries, 1 had deboned quail, 1 had curd, and 1 had sweets. Okay, so I was shocked that he had rice, and that the rice was only 1/6 of the entire meal. 2 had vegetables, 1 cup of deboned quail meat. And that is the only food, only meal that they eat. In the evening, the Maharaja always had his drink with quail tikkers. Okay, so he ate 1 meal a day, pure fasting through the day. He's either riding or he's working. There is no snacking, no munching, nothing, no tea, no coffee, nothing. And at night, he's having his whatever liquor and tikkers, quail tikkers. If we go back to 1129 AD, there is this book called Manasolasa, written by Someshwara III. He's the emperor of the Chalukyan Empire from Badami, Karnataka. And he describes the exact same policy of the day. He says, you wake up in the morning, you're not eating anything, you have a bath, and you chew pan. So you're just chewing that leaf and you're spitting it out. You carry your spittoon. But for him, somebody carries his gold spittoon, right? He's not swallowing it. Then he goes through the whole day, he goes through court, he comes for lunch, he has a big lunch. Then the afternoon is spent either, he has a siesta, he's riding, or he's gone out hunting. And in the evening, he joins his ladies, and they have liquor, they have alcohol, and they have these various snacks, most of which are meaty snacks, right? So this is the way people ate. This is the way people ate.
Yeah, and
Maharaja Ranjit could have eaten as much as he wanted just before the Raj. He's one of the wealthiest, wealthier than, I don't know, anybody in England or in India. He could have eaten as much as he wanted. But this is the traditional way of eating.
Yeah, I think it's so important, and I think it's important to get these stories. So it's great to know how the kings were eating. It's also good to know how common people were eating, because...
So how were common people eating?
Yeah.
So we have throughout, people are saying they're eating 1 meal a day and fasting several days in a month. Manusmriti says that. Megasthini says that. Megasthini says they eat 1 solid meal a day and they eat it by themselves. And on their feast days, they have meat and alcohol and sugar and all that, right? Then we come to the European observers. And so as late as Jahangir's India, you have Delay, who is the Dutch factor in Goa. And he says the laborers, they eat khichdi once a day. The rest of the day they are fasting. But because the Dutch companies, they told them that you please eat something and come. So they were eating a handful of parched grain, murmura or something like that, before coming to work. And the Mughal army, the soldiers were eating khichdi once a day. So basically, ever since Manusmriti was formalized, you were eating 1 vegetarian meal, that is khichdi, once a day, and you were fasting the rest of the day. There was no keeping leftovers, no munching, no nothing. And you had your feast days when you ate, you feasted.
Yeah.
On the days of the puja, you fasted, and then you offered the puja, and then you feasted.
Yeah.
Okay, so the common people were eating the same way. This was not a thing for the elite.
Yeah.
But they were eating, they're having the meat and alcohol in the prescribed manner.
No, it's fascinating. I guess what strikes me as I mean, I'm just trying to figure out how this works out to be a nutritionally complete diet, right? So you have your lentils and your rice and so on. Okay, that's some protein and so on. But I think that the role of the feast day
Yeah.
protein, but the role of the feast day is probably also really important. That at least, there were probably feast days on average, maybe once a month or once every 6 weeks, and you are getting
So
some.
how many festivals do we have in a year?
Oh, a lot.
About 36.
Yeah. Sounds like.
Alberoni documented 36.
Hmm.
And with each feast day, you have its typical sweets and typical foods that you have. And he's written all those down.
Oh, it's fantastic. It's fantastic.
So uh, on those days, you ate as much as you wanted. This is something that the British have also documented, that the Hindus eat only once a day. They light the fire only once a day. And they don't eat through the day, except their feast days when they eat as much and any amount that they want.
Yeah.
Obviously, the meat portion couldn't be that much because that is being, distributed amongst everybody. But maybe the rest of the food, the vegetables and things that you could eat as much as you want on that day. So what I'm actually trying to say is that the human body does not require so much of food. The human body actually requires very little food. It's a thrifty body. And if you correct this, it will survive and be healthy on a small quantity of food. And the fasting, in between fasting, is very important for the body to recover.
Yeah, no, I think that's very important.
Something interesting. I'll tell you another thing that's very interesting. In the 16th century, now this is the time when, the colonial powers are coming in and they're giving Indians jobs, and, the habit of a little parched food in the morning comes in, and murmura something comes in. And there is this king called Mangarasa III. He's Jain. He's a pure vegetarian. He is ruling from Mysore. And he's written a book called the Supa Shastra. Supa is the root word for the English word soup. Right? So in the book, he's addressing the masses, and he's telling them, if you eat once a day, you're a yogi. If you eat twice a day, you're a bhogi. If you eat 3 times a day, you are a rogi, you will suffer. If you eat 4 times a day, you are a rakshas, you're a demon. And how are we eating? We wake up in the morning and we have, biscuits and coffee. Then we have maybe a glass of juice to keep us healthy. Then we will have our breakfast. Then we will have tea and maybe some biscuits. Visit somebody's office, have another cup of tea. Yeah. Then we will have lunch. Then we will have tea and biscuits again. Then we will have drinks and snacks again. Then we will have dinner again. We're eating about 9 or 10 meals in a day.
Yeah.
We've gone beyond Mangarasa's imagination.
Yeah.
What he was warning us about, we have far exceeded his imagination.
Yeah, and the thing is, those of us who studied nutrition in the 1980s and 1990s were told that this is the healthy way to eat, to level blood sugars and so on, which we now know is nonsense. But I want to ask you a very specific question, Manoshi, which is that, these days we talk a lot about intermittent fasting, and I use fasting as well in my practice as well. And it's all great, but there are some studies indicating that it's all about calorie restriction. So the number of times you eat doesn't matter as long as you're restricting calories. Do you think that it's the fasting also played a role, or just the fact that people were eating a fewer number of calories? Probably both of these, or what's your thought?
I think when you eat enough to keep yourself full till the next meal. So whether your calories come from fat or your calories come from carbohydrates, it basically has to get you to the next meal. If it comes from fat, it will be easier, as we see in the Andamanese and the Mesolithic people. So if they have a meal of pork, and they will eat twice a day, the day the kill has been made, and they will finish off that pork. So maybe they'll eat a little the next day. And the next 2 or 3 days, they will not go hunting. right? So that fat and protein was going to sustain them over the next 2 or 3 days. So there are these anthropologists who studied the Andamanese and they've lived with them, Indians, and they have written, they've studied the behavior of the Andamanese, and they say they're really calm people. So if somebody walks into a hut and just makes off with some of their food, the owner doesn't get upset, because if he doesn't have food for a couple of days, it's no big deal. It's okay for him to fast. And so these people are actually quite calm people, and they don't get upset that somebody just took the food away. So there's Dr. Sumit Mukherjee's book, which really opens your mind out to how the Mesolithic body worked. And if we ate like this for 50,000 years, then we are genetically meant to eat like that. Agriculture came in only in 8,000 BCE. So 10,000 years does not affect our genes. And that too, till about 100 AD, Manusmriti really reduced the amount of agricultural produce you could eat. It kept a very strict limit on the amount you could eat, and it made up for it by making you fast repeatedly. Repeatedly, they would ask you to fast. And they would say fasting is not a punishment. Seize the advantage of fasting. If you wake up and the sun has risen, fast that day. If you're sleepy before the sun goes down, fast the next day. Take advantage, seize the advantage of fasting. Now, whether a study, I know there are a lot of people who will tell me, oh, well, this is not a random controlled trial and you don't have a double-blind study, etc., etc. We have a study of 70,000 years. Look at 70,000 years and then tell me about randomized controlled trials or double-blind studies, and tell me the methods of those.
Yeah, no, I agree. And with that in mind, I mean, this may be, maybe you don't have a strong opinion on this, but what about foods that didn't exist? So we've talked about foods that didn't exist up until about 10,000 years ago, which are your grains and so on. But there are also foods that have become a big part of the Indian diet only in the last 20, 30 years. And I'm thinking here specifically of like your soy oils, your corn oils, your refined, these kind of refined things that have replaced more traditional fats such as coconut oil and ghee and so on. Do you have any thoughts on those oils?
I don't understand it too much.
Yeah.
But the way I advise and I follow myself is stick to the old oils. If we were ghee and mustard oil and coconut oil and till oil eating people, then let's just keep eating that.
Yeah.
Okay, I am not trying to differentiate between industrially processed oil and the kachi ghani. Maybe kachi ghani is better. I don't have that much of knowledge. But I think if for so many thousands of years, if these were the fats that we were eating and we did well on them, we should just continue.
Yeah. And the last question I'll ask, just to sum it up. So if you can, before I ask my last question, let me make this point. If I understand what you're saying correctly, one can actually live quite healthily on a vegetarian diet, as long as one does not eat anywhere close to calorie excess or sort of fat excess. Fat excess in the sense of energy excess, so that the body is storing fat. Have I got it more or less correct? No.
So it is the carbohydrate that converts into the fat that you store, that you wear on your body, right? The fat that you eat gets burnt up.
100%.
Okay.
No, so my question is how best, if you had a vegetarian client or a vegetarian patient, what's the best way to advise them to eat?
So basically, all my patients, since we all eat vegetarian food, all of them are advised to control their appetites. When you cut down the plant foods, appetite reduces. So you try to cut down the frequency of intake. When you eat to fill your stomach, and you eat more of vegetables which have less carbohydrate. Eat less of grains or no grains which are high glucogenic carbohydrate. And you fast in between, fast once a week to make up for it. So I'm teaching them 24 hours of fasting. I'm also teaching them 48 hours of fasting. So 48 hours of fasting once a week, and 24, 23, 22 hours of fasting every day
basis. Yeah.
on a daily basis to correct the side effects of the carbohydrates that you're taking.
Yeah. Fantastic stuff. Thank you so much for this discussion. Before I let you go, just tell us a little bit more about your next book project. I know you're working on another book, and where people can go if they want to find out more about your work.
So the next book is going to be The Feasts of India. So the feasts from 70,000 BCE, how did people eat? And how was it changing? As centuries went by, what foods came in? And the question that you asked, say, like, there were foods that were not around earlier and are around now. So which foods came in early? Foods came in late. So some foods like sugarcane, for instance. We all think sugarcane belongs to India. But sugarcane, now we have the studies that say that it came from Papua New Guinea. And in Harappa, in about 3000 BCE to 1900 BCE, they found evidence of sugarcane, but the quality is so poor that it was cattle fodder. It wasn't, humans were not eating it. We were not eating sugarcane or sugar. But in 500 BCE, when Emperor Darius comes to India, his people write that the Indians have the reed that produces honey. So by 500 BC, we are eating sugar. We are extracting sugarcane juice. We're making jaggery. So how the feasts or the food of India is changing. So I'm trying to write the history of India through the foods that Indians ate. And how did the food come? How did Papua New Guinea bring sugarcane to India? So if they could bring sugarcane to India, they could have possibly also brought in the sweet potato, which came from South America, and which is why it finds its place in our sacred food lists. I don't know, did they bring the pumpkin then? Did the pumpkin come floating from South America over the ocean? Or was it brought by the Polynesians, traders? When did pumpkin arrive? I'm not sure, but it is there in the sacred food list.
Yeah.
The South Indians, instead of sacrificing a goat, they will sacrifice a pumpkin. They'll put sindoor on the pumpkin and they'll sacrifice the pumpkin.
Fascinating.
How did pumpkin come into the sacred food list? And also temples. Temples are our repositories of ancient knowledge. But so the food that you get in temples, if it's there in the temple food, it has to be old ancient food. But what happened is during the famines, the temples started behaving like langars, like feed everybody who comes. So they also started changing the food that they prepared. But many of the old temples stick to the old foods.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm studying, and I hope that will be interesting.
Fantastic stuff. Just to, I don't know if this will be a help or a hindrance, but I know that the Southern Chinese and the Vietnamese also claim sugarcane as their own. So that may be an avenue worth looking into for that particular plant.
It probably came on that route from Polynesia, Southeast Asia. It probably came by that route.
It may well have. It may well have. But I know that there are some Vietnamese scholars, especially, who contest this PNG origin of sugarcane and say no, it started in Vietnam. It's another question. Vietnam versus China is a whole other debate.
But there's also a very strong contender because we have so many varieties.
Yes.
So as time goes, we will have many more interesting papers to look forward.
Thank you again. And what's the best place for people to find you? Are you on? Do you have any social media or anything like that?
I am kind of there on Facebook and not there. I just read what other people write.
Okay. And what about Twitter?
Yeah, I'm there on Twitter as NFOL.
Okay, so people can find you.
#NFOL, yeah.
Okay, thank you so much, Manoshi Bhattacharya. It's been a real pleasure, and I hope we can do this again sometime.
Thank you, Sameer. Thank you, Pat.
Thanks for listening to my conversation with Dr. Manoshi Bhattacharya. For more content like this, please do check out my website, sameerdossani.net. There you can also sign up for my newsletter and get in touch if you'd like to talk about how to transform your health. With that, I'm Sameer, your health coach and PhD student. I'll see you next time.